All right. Another landscape management model is based on the Ecological Landscaping Association's um, guidance, and they are simply a landscaping organization of they're like an association for landscape contractors. They can join this, and all the contractors that are part of the Ecological Landscaping Association are um, sustainable. They're geared towards environmentally friendly techniques and keeping the ecosystems healthy. So we don't have a local chapter for that, but our California Landscape Contract Association is one that's similar. When I first started working at Santa Barbara City College, the the California Landscape Contractors Association didn't say a lot about sustainability in on their website and et cetera. But now, 10 years later, they are focused on sustainability. So I bring that up to illustrate how sustainability is not alternative. It's the new norm, and our local landscape contractor association now focuses a lot on sustainability. So that's that. The last of the methods are those 8 that I'll mention is called the precautionary principle, and that is just this. If there's a question of human or environmental harm from a material or practice that's going to be used in landscaping, those landscapers need to make all efforts to find cost-effective, less harmful solutions. So as simple as that. Take all precautions possible. Defining sustainability, we've talked a little bit about this. Let's look a little bit more in detail, all the resources that go into a landscape site. Fertilizers, pesticides, plant materials, soil amendments, irrigation, hardware, labor, money, all the resources that go out. That's kind of the waste stream. Some fertilizers run off and aren't used by plants, and they flow off with the water as it runs down the street. Pesticides, the same. Some water is not absorbed by the plants. That goes somewhere else. That's a waste stream. Green waste, erosion is soil waste, and soil amendments will flow off the property, and some plants die or some materials are cut. And that's the plant material green waste. So you can see all that for yourself. But really what the main kind of new idea in this slide and this approach of sustainable landscaping is that we build the energy of the system itself. So the plants and that landscape don't need as many inputs and don't have as much waste if the system itself is built. So in a sense, looking at that middle section there, energy of system, if you build up really good soil, texture, structure, soil biology, you plant a lot of variety of plants and diversity that bring in all kinds of insects, including beneficials, grow healthy plants that have good strong biomass and roots, plant plants in the right microclimate so they do well, utilize absorption of the sun, so a lot of good photosynthesis is happening to help that system get food free from the sun, take advantage of the wind and air circulation to improve the quality of the plants. That's building the energy of the system. When those things happen, less inputs are needed, less waste is produced. As simple as that. And here's another way of looking at it. A non-sustainable system has high inputs, low energy of the actual system. Not a lot of energy is stored in the plants and the soil of a non-sustainable system. But it also has high waste. So on the left, think of like a lawn. You have one species in the lawn. It takes a ton of inputs, a lot of water, a lot of fertilizers, sometimes herbicides, a lot of labor to mow it all the time. The system itself is just all a bunch of grasses with short roots that can't handle life very well on their own. So that's low system energy. And then high waste, all the lawn clippings, all the water runoff, pesticides and fertilizers and herbicides that aren't used, runoff. There's a lot of waste there. Not the least of which is labor. If you've ever owned a sizable lawn, it's just a pain in the butt. Takes a lot of time to mow it. I used to live in Ohio, and there's a lot more water there over the summer, a lot more rain, and you are like a slave to your lawn, you're mowing it, at least once a week. So that's a low system energy, high waste, high input system. Sustainable is the opposite. Again, the system itself, let's imagine as, contrary to a lawn, that you have a front yard of Mediterranean and native plants. So the plants themselves are well established because they do really well in this environment. You don't need really any fertilizers, low amounts of water, low amounts of labor because they can handle life on their own, and a low waste, less pruning, less runoff because you're not watering as much, you're not fertilizing as much, so those don't go into the runoff. So yeah, that's what a sustainable system would look like. Just in case you weren't convinced that it's important to be and focus on sustainability in landscaping, I'll give you some stats here. Are lawns sustainable? Well, we'll see. If you look at the top 8 irrigated crops in the United States, corn, alfalfa, soybeans, orchards, and there are 4 more that aren't listed: cotton, pastureland, wheat, and other types of hay, non-alfalfa hay. Of those 8, all of the acreage of those top 8 don't come near the acreage that we have of lawn. So if you were a visitor from another galaxy and you came to our planet, you take a quick look, you'd say like, oh, lawn is the dominant species, and that must be their god or deity because there's so much of it. That must be so revered and highly valued. One of the most highly valued things on their planet is lawn. So yeah, we use a ton of acreage goes towards lawns, and similarly a ton of water too, a lot of water. So again, we have 60 million acre feet per year used on water. And if you look at all these other crops combined, again, they don't equate to the same amount of water used on lawn. And lawns don't produce food. So when we talk about droughts and we talk about food shortages, we really don't have a drought. We really, droughts are something that's context dependent. We have a drought because we have all these super high wasteful water using landscape elements like lawns around. If we didn't have any lawns, people wouldn't talk about drought. Our systems and our societies could withstand much greater variance in annual precipitation without it being a problem. So we like our lawns, and there are good reasons. They're beautiful and they're recreational. There are reasons for them. When we now talk about more and more people, more and more urban and suburban areas, we might want to rethink, though, the amount of resources we use on lawn and the amount of lawn we have. It may not be so good for us in the long run. Let's talk a little bit about IPM. It warrants more depth to explanation and discussion because it's a really useful tool, IPM tool or approach to pest management, and it's also something that's becoming more popular. In 2004, the city of Santa Barbara adopted an IPM policy, and they have been very successful in reducing the amounts of pesticides that are used on city properties, that city parks, recreational areas, etc., and parkways, which is the area between the street and the sidewalk. Every year, an annual report is written for the City of Santa Barbara's IPM policy, and they talk about the types of pests that are used and the quantities of pesticides used, exemptions that are in place, etc. So the actual FAIR zone model, like the map that was created to decide which chemicals could be used where in the city of Santa Barbara, that was made a couple of years later in 2004. And again, like I explained earlier, there are zones mapped out: green zones, yellow zone, red zones. Green zones are where people are a lot and you want to only use green, low toxicity chemicals. Yellow, moderate human use, moderately toxic chemicals. Red, people aren't in those areas very much, and you can use higher toxicity chemicals. And this is basically saying what I just said. So, great thing about Santa Barbara's IPM policy is it really did work in a lot of ways. In this annual report that they write, if you look at the bottom here where it says citywide, the total units of pesticides applied decreased 18% in the year 2010. So this is just looking at the highlights from the year past. So this is one of their annual reports a few years ago. And this was earlier on, they started in 2006, so you're looking at some of the bigger gains, the positives from this IPM policy being implemented. But look down at the bottom, second line under citywide, units of green materials increased 19%. You say, oh, they're increasing use of pesticides, but that's an increase of almost 20% of low toxicity chemicals. This next line down, units of yellow materials decreased 50%. That's huge, a huge reduction of moderately toxic chemicals. And the next line down, units of red materials decreased 98%. So what you're seeing here is all the times when, before the IPM policy, those city groundskeepers, if they saw a pest or a problem, a weed or an insect, there were no restrictions. They could go to their chemical shed and they usually would get out the big guns right away to try to nuke that pest. There was no oversight, no plan, no real concern of environmental toxicity built into their decision process. Now, with the IPM policy, it does not preclude use of toxic chemicals. You can use toxic chemicals with an IPM policy, but they are the ultimate last resort after you've tried all kinds of other things. You first try green chemicals. Those don't work. You can apply for an exemption for a yellow chemical if the IPM committee reviews your application and says, okay, yes, we think you should use this yellow chemical, or you can, then you can use that. If that doesn't work and you want to use a red chemical, again, you got to go back to the committee. And the committee is made up of a number of people, including citizens. I served on the City of Carpinteria's IPM committee, and it's not just the groundskeepers. There's some people from the actual, employed by the city, but there's also just parents. I was a soccer dad. That's why I was on CARP's IPM committee, and we didn't want our girls playing soccer that were going to be touching fertilizers and pesticides. So that committee does have some power to say, no, we deny your request to use a red chemical. So there's oversight and there's planning and there's a vast reduction in chemical use. That's the takeaway. That's so good. So IPM policies really work. City of Santa Barbara adopted this in 2004. City of Carpinteria adopted theirs around 2012, I think. I'm not sure the exact date, but a little later. And it's been good results. There is also posted on Canvas the City of Santa Barbara's IPM policy. It's a long document, but I listed for you some pages of interest, and some of it are just those chemical lists. You might be wondering, like, what's on the green chemical list? What's on the yellow chemical list? What would be a red chemical in those fair zone, color zones? And there's lists of them on page 23, and then some of the other things that are interesting in that report, like the effectiveness of alternative practices, showing you how well they worked. And then also, again, like I said before, it lists all the different pests and how many hours were spent trying to deal with that pest and how effective they were. So really cool stuff. Here's just an example I pulled out of the policy from Santa Barbara, the IPM policy, of some green chemicals used in their list. So all of these are low toxicity, natural methods to deal with a pest. You can see there's most of these are insecticides, and some of them are herbicides too. Herbicides are things that kill weeds. Insecticides kill insects.